everybody. Welcome to Mish Men podcast. Today, you're here with me, Dustin Labar, and to my immediate left
That's right.
is Mr. Adam Mauser.
How do you do?
We hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode on logic. I know I did.
I did too, but yeah.
You were, yeah.
I'm a weirdo.
You did it was great. It was great. You may be wondering, are these guys wearing the same clothes? The answer is yes.
We slept here.
But we slept here for
past week.
Yes, we're so dedicated to the podcast that we're not leaving.
No.
So we haven't.
No, we haven't.
Here.
The food was good. Someone slid us some rice and beans under the door.
Yeah, it's kind of like Survivor.
Yeah.
But we didn't vote anybody off, so it's a little bit better.
Well, then it wouldn't be Mishmash Men.
It wouldn't be Mish. It would just be Mishmash.
You'd have to change a vowel.
Yeah, it would be terrible. It wouldn't be alliteration anymore. So again, we appreciate you guys. We've gotten a lot of likes, a lot of comments, a lot of good feedback. We do want your feedback. You know, are you enjoying the episodes or not enjoying the episodes? Is there something that you wish we touched upon more? Is there something you wish we talked about? That's all great feedback. We want to keep giving you the episodes that you want.
Let me add this. We purposed, due to our own schedule constraints, because we've got jobs that actually earn us money so that we can do things like this podcast.
Correct.
But we purposed to do 30 to 45 minutes. And so 30 is like the short end and no longer than 45.
Right.
And I would enjoy that feedback. Is this a good amount of time? I like 30-minute podcasts myself, because I got a 30-minute drive to work.
Sure, perfect.
But give us that feedback. We enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean we do appreciate it, and we're gonna keep giving you this stuff that you guys need.
That's right.
It's not that you want it,
But you need it.
You need it.
You need some information on sundry topics.
And I think today everybody needs some information on the Salem Witch Trials.
Absolutely.
So I thought this is a fun topic, and you'll see why at the end. I'll tie it in at the end. But Adam, if you will please tell me what you know about the Salem Witch Trials, and then we will piggyback off that with my information.
Okay. So the Salem Witch Trials, as I know it, there were a series of trials in the town of Salem, centered around the town of Salem, Massachusetts, where people were being accused of witchcraft and demonic possession.
Yep.
And through those trials, people were prosecuted, and they were persecuted. Two different words.
Yep.
And it was quite a melee. And so there's a lot of factors that went into it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it. There's a lot of subscription to certain views that may or may not be true.
Right.
And I think we won't ferret it out, but we'll at least discuss these various things. But what it centered around was demonic possession and witchcraft being practiced and people being accused of it by the local government.
Yep. So have you ever seen the movie The Crucible? It's with Daniel Day-Lewis.
I have not.
Unbelievable movie. So first off, if you're listening to this podcast, when you're done hearing it, watch The Crucible. Daniel Day-Lewis, phenomenal actor.
Well, if it's from Hollywood, it must be true.
They've nailed it exactly.
Yeah.
They don't even put that thing. Some of these facts have been altered. Yeah. It is exactly what happened. They're sure of it. So, but it's a great movie. I've watched it multiple times. We actually watched it in school, my high school, which is how we read a book, and then we watched the movie, The Crucible. So first off,
I'd never heard of that movie.
The Crucible?
Actually, yeah.
It's dude, Daniel Day-Lewis is unbelievable. I mean, you've seen him in multiple movies.
I saw him in that Italian film.
Which one? The Italian film?
Yeah.
What was he in the Italian film?
Yeah, well, remember that story I told on the other podcast?
Oh, yes,
about,
yes, okay. Yeah. Okay.
What's the oil movie?
There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood. Yeah. That is, I mean, he is amazing. So it does a pretty good job. If you look up the facts, if you aren't like super focused on Hollywood thing and you just kind of look at the movie as a whole, they do a fairly good job of explaining what happened during the Salem Witch Trials.
Sure.
They do a fairly good job. So first off, witch trials or people being accused of witches, as I looked this up, was in Europe in the 1300s and ended up stopping around the 1600s. And then we were just like, well, we should pick this sucker up. So like really when they were stopping what was considered witch trials in Europe, 13 to 1600, then this happened kind of in Salem.
Right.
So,
it was basically the Western world that was going on.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So long story short on this, basically, is in Salem, Massachusetts. They started having there was 3 girls in particular, 2 young girls, and then they called her a servant. all were were showing signs of being possessed or doing witchcraft, or not doing witchcraft, but like being possessed and acting super strange.
Sure.
Um,
And when you say strange, you mean they were hallucinating?
They were acting like there were things weren't, hallucinating, convulsions, these very weird things that they couldn't explain.
So that's the core of it.
Yes.
They were acting up.
Yes, they were acting up. People didn't know what to do. So during this time, I wanted to say this fact. So the Salem Witch Trials is a huge reason why we have innocent until proven guilty written in our Constitution.
Okay.
Because in the Salem Witch Trials, that wasn't how things worked. So you were pretty much guilty until proven innocent, but it was like impossible. So I'll explain that more. So
it wasn't Blackstone's.
What do you mean?
We could talk about that another time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, the Salem Witch Trials started with two girls having unexplainable fits, and there's two girls. One's named Betty Parrish, and the other is named Abigail Williams. And then there was another girl who was a servant. So they all were showing these signs.
Was she a servant to one of those other two?
One of the people. Yeah. Well, okay. I don't know if it was one of the other two. She was by the Parrish family, who was one of the girls that was accused of being that. So, her name was Tituba.
Okay.
And she was actually the first one to admit that she was a witch.
Okay.
So, just to give you guys a clear understanding of what was going on at this point, is they were legitimately like, we're going to kill you unless you tell us you're a witch.
Right.
And so the girls that were like, we're not witches, we swear. They're like, well, we're going to kill you to find out. And then this girl was like, well, don't kill me. I'm definitely a witch. And they were like, all right, perfect. We won't kill you. So that's kind of how this crazy thing started. So then it became this weird thing of like, I don't know how to explain this exactly. It became this very weird thing of like, you had to choose between telling the truth, which was I'm not a witch,
right,
and being like, they're like, we're going to hang you.
Right. So it's like they were just assuming that they were.
Yeah, correct. So that's these people were like, they were literally like, if you just admit it, we won't kill you.
Right.
And so people were just like, yeah, we're witches. So it also became a thing with, you were afraid during this time. This is the late 1600s, by the way,
right.
1690s. So people were legitimately afraid. Like there were these three girls, and they would accuse people of being witches. So like, for instance, if you were there and you were like, I don't think these girls are witches, they'd be like, witch.
Right.
This guy's a witch.
Yeah. And if he denies it, he's a witch.
He's a witch. Exactly. Yeah. So, so that's kind of the way it got totally out of hand. They actually created their own court.
Sounds like a groupthink problem.
It is. That's what they equated it to. It's basically a groupthink thing, a group situation. So Bridget Bishop was the first person to be executed for witchcraft because of the Salem Witch Trials. They said that she had questionable morals. Mm-hmm. So I think you can kind of understand what kind of woman she was at that point.
Right.
So they were accusing anybody. Mostly it was women. There was a few men. Are you familiar with Giles Corey? Have you ever heard that name? Okay, so if you watch The Crucible, you'll kind of like lock into him, but I'll explain that later. They also killed animals during it.
Huh.
So they'd be like, that dog is for sure a witch.
Right.
That dog is definitely a witch.
Now, was this common throughout? Like you mentioned earlier, this was also going on in Europe.
Yeah.
So the Western world, were there accusations of other demonic possessions and witchcraft throughout the whole world, the Western world anyway?
In Europe, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think there's a very specific reason why it happened in Salem, Massachusetts. So I don't think it happened everywhere in the Western world. I think it may have been because so many people moved from Europe to that location, and they had like ties there that there were maybe more. They didn't invent the idea. They had heard the idea, and then maybe these things were happening to them.
And there's no internet, so it's just it's just happening.
They weren't like WebMD, like
it's word of mouth and newspapers, but they were all local anyway.
So Dorothy Good was the youngest person accused during the Salem Witch Trials, and this is really funny. She was 4 years old, and they were just like, witch. Yeah. They were like, look at this witch right here. So what is like when you think they murdered witches? How do you think they did it?
I think drowning wasn't that one of the things?
So drowning was one of the things, but that was a
and fire.
Test. That was a test. Drowning was a test. So I'll explain. When they actually convicted somebody of witchcraft, the immediate thing that people say is they burned the witch at the stake.
Right.
But they actually hanged everybody.
Oh, they did.
They hanged everybody.
So they didn't burn anybody.
They did not burn anybody to kill them.
Right.
Those were tests.
Burning was a test. It's interesting because John Wycliffe.
I don't think so.
So he was a Scottish theologian.
Okay.
And around the same time.
Okay.
And so he was burned by the. When I say the church, I don't mean like the people of the church that, like the Puritans were like this pious group of people that formed churches.
Right.
But then there's the hierarchy church, like the Church of England, that did not like what Wycliffe was doing, which is translating the Bible to where out of Latin,
normal people could read
to
it.
Where like and the language of the time, which is like the when you read the King James version of the Bible, that was like the language of the times. It wasn't a haughty hierarchy. It wasn't Latin. It was what people spoke,
what people could read. Actually.
And so he was a translator, and they burned him at the stake.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can talk about it freely. So like, it was really funny because the test, they'd be like so I'd be like, Adam, you're a witch. I'm taking you to court.
Right.
And we'd go to court. They'd be like, we think you're a witch too. So the only way to find out is we're going to burn you because witches survive.
Oh, okay.
And so they're like,
and if you die, then I'm sorry.
You're like, oh, well, dang it.
I was wrong.
Sorry, Adam. So they would be like, this is one of the tests you have to go through. But if you were convicted to be a witch, like you were sentenced to death, they hanged you, minus one person who was Giles Corey. They crushed him to death.
Oh.
So they took a board and they started laying stones on him.
Oh, I've seen, or not seen, but heard of it.
So this really turned into so the groupthink aspect of it is it turned into, so your daughter knows that you want Caleb's land.
Right.
So now you're like, hey, maybe Caleb's a witch.
Yeah.
To tell your daughter. And now you're telling your daughter, like, hey, maybe Caleb's a witch. And now all of a sudden your daughter's like, Caleb's a witch. And you're like, well, I'll take his land. He's dead now. Right. I'll take his land. So it kind of turned into this weird thing where they were just like, everybody was like super concerned that they were going to be accused of being a witch from like these certain people. So it did turn into this massive group think.
Were the accusers, were they in seats of power?
No, so a lot of times
associated with
a lot of times the accusers were these three young women. And typically it was because people were questioning whether they were telling the truth or not. So anytime somebody accused them of lying, they'd be like, that's a witch. That person's a witch. So now these kids are protecting themselves. So they also got immediate gratification to know if you question them, they're like, that person's a witch.
Yeah, just a counter accusation.
They can just say this person's a witch, and then everybody's like, oh, snap. Well, these witches know another witch.
Right.
So, and they would say stuff like, they made me sign, one of the things was they made me sign in the devil's book, which that must have been a thing back then. I don't even know what that is. So the devil had a book, and this person made him sign it, and then they were witches. I said this earlier, a special court was established for the Salem Witch Trials. It was the Court of Oyer and Terminer, and it was established in June 1692 because the witch trials were overwhelming the normal court system. Oh. There were so many people being accused of witches that they had to make their own court where they could go take care of this.
It sounds like it was just this fervor of things that were just going on in a small area.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It just got out of control.
It got super out of control, which is very interesting because, like you were saying, like the group think, and you could just imagine people just walking around being like, "Look at all these witches! It's a ton of witches."
It's interesting because, like later on, one of the podcasts I want to do, I want to build on this, but one of the things I ultimately want to talk about is mass formation, and it's this very thing that you're describing. It's happened multiple times throughout. Nazi Germany is a perfect example of it.
Okay.
And you might think of a more recent example where people are just like making accusations about purity and cleanliness and that sort of thing.
Yes.
We won't go down that path quite yet, but
anti-vaxxer.
Yeah. And so there might be there might be a similarity it's not just this group over here. It could be anybody.
Yep. Excuse me. So I just had said to you that, most people think of women being accused as witches. There were some men accused as being witches. So John Proctor, if you watch the movie, I believe that Daniel Day-Lewis plays John Proctor. I believe that he plays this guy, which is an actual person. They accused him because there was like some kind of, they suspected that he may have been having an affair, I think, and like he had some land, and like people were accusing him, but he was like an upstanding member of the town of Salem.
Right.
But he was one of the major guys.
But he might have had some dirt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they kind of, so it's, it says here, Salem didn't burn their witches at the stake. Most witches were hanged except of Giles Corey. And there's like a very famous line that they quoted him, and he says it in the movie, is like, more weight. Because they were like, just admit you're a witch. And he's like, more weight. It's like this old farmer guy. He's like in his 70s, and he's just like he's not quitting. So after the Salem Witch Trials were over, there was a huge effort to try to like, be like, hey, we're really sorry about this. And those people that we killed, they weren't really witches, and we're really apologetic about it. And there's one reason why I think that happened, and I'll explain that as we go. But okay. I thought a fun thing would be to go over some of the tests the witches had to go through.
Okay.
So, Adam, I accuse you of being a witch. You say, I certainly am not a witch.
I am not.
Here are some of the tests that we could do. The swimming test. They were dragged to the nearest body of water, stripped to their undergarments, bound, and then tossed in to see if they could sink or float. So in this, they had figured out that witches floated and normal people sank. So this is one of those things where they're like, you're a witch, and you're like, I'm not. And they're like, well, there's only one way to
That's insane, because like literally anybody could do this if they don't panic anyway.
Yep.
You could be bound all you want, but if you just regulate the volume of air in your lungs,
okay,
you can float and just relax. You just got to relax.
Even if you're bound. So yeah,
if you're bound, yeah.
I don't know if did they put weight on them?
You can do that. Now they're like muscular density is a variable in that equation. Okay. But yeah, you can do that. You can if you just relax and you train yourself to relax, and you train yourself to like, okay, this is how I'm going to function in this.
Okay.
You get thrown into water, no, bound or not. You don't have to like wiggle your arms and legs.
Yep.
You can just regulate the volume of air in your lungs.
Yep.
And then just control your breathing, and then you can float, which is funny because that's a state of survival. That's like a survival function.
And then
but if you refuse that or you panic, one of the two, well, you die.
Yeah.
Like, well, I guess he wasn't a witch.
And if you float, they're like, witch.
Yeah.
Hang them. Yeah. And that's it. So
that's a logical fallacy might be in play there. I'm not sure which one, but we talked about that last week. No True Scotsman, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the next one was the prayer test. This one's super funny.
Okay.
So they're like, you're a witch. You just have to read lines from the Bible. You have to recite them from memory.
Yeah.
Witches can't do that, or they'll die. And they're like, okay, but here's the thing: you cannot make any mistakes. One mistake means you're a witch. So if you're reciting it from memory and you make any mistake,
oh my goodness,
dead.
These are impossible.
I mean, they're literally like.
Well, the funny thing is, like, literally, I assume that the Bible is true, right? That's my assumption.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter why I assume that, but I'm going to assume that. Well, I know that the Bible, the devil, Satan, can recite the Bible. He can recite God's word.
Sure.
And so that's not a good marker.
I mean, they sure thought it was.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have any mistakes or omissions.
That's crazy.
Well, they said it may have been a sign that the suspect was nervous. They still were like, nope.
Yeah.
You have to be.
That's tough.
Now we have the touch test. Sorry, they brought a priest in to lay hands on the person, and if they could touch that person, they were not a witch, which I guess would be the best way to do it. I don't know if they didn't use the test often.
So
because the priest couldn't touch, they wouldn't be able to touch a witch.
Oh, okay, so that's the mark.
It would burn, yeah. Witch cake. The witch cake was a supernatural dessert used to identify suspected evildoers. This is great. I read this earlier and I thought it was super funny. They would simply take the victim's urine, mix it with rye meal and ashes, and bake it into a cake. The stomach-turning concoction was then fed to a dog.
This is complicated.
If the dog fell in the hopes that the beast would fall under its spell and reveal the name of the guilty sorcerer. So they thought the dog was going to say, "It's that guy over there."
In words.
In words.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So it's pretty awesome.
Now, how accurate is this telling of the test, or is that like the writings of the times?
What do you mean?
Like, like in the guy's own hand that was like describing this, like, okay, well, this is a legitimate test. I'm going to write this down, and that's preserved, or is this just?
This is just some guy writing about it.
Okay, some
this
guy
is,
writing about
This
it.
is not like, and the dog shall eat.
Yeah.
The dog shall eat the urine. We have witches' marks. This is unsightly blemishes. Sound a lot like birthmarks.
Yeah.
So if they had the devil's mark, they would be considered witches. So
Yeah.
pretty much, just for you guys listening, every test you were a witch,
It sounds like it.
or you died.
If you failed, then you.
That's
or
correct.
if you passed the test, but you ended up dying.
Yep. So let me circle back and say why I think this whole story is interesting. So I asked you a couple weeks ago, where is it at here? Oh, here we go. I asked you a couple weeks ago, have you ever heard of Rye Ergot?
Yeah.
And you said no.
I had never heard of it.
Okay.
And that's ARGOT?
RYEERGOT, Rye Ergot. So basically, in the 70s, this doctor was looking into this and was like, a lot of these people seem like they have rye ergot poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
So rye ergot is something that happens on rye.
The grain.
The grain.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it's after a really wet spring.
Uh-huh.
And this gets this rye ergot. It gets this rye ergot on it. And if somebody ingests it, they show signs of hallucinations,
Right.
convulsions. So the overall thought is that, and they can prove this based on like farming records and all this stuff, that the spring of this year, because it lasted from 1692 to 1693, that spring they had a very wet spring.
Right.
And then they believe that rye ergot poisoning was the reason that all these people were showing signs of witchcraft. So this lady did this study, and she said, I believe all these people had ergotism, which is the girls literally were probably having hallucinations and convulsions.
Right.
And so people were like, y'all are a bunch of witches.
Right.
And then because they were like, we're going to kill you unless you, and they were like, I guess we're witches.
Yeah. Well, if someone's threatening to kill me, it's going to change my thinking.
So that's why I think it's so crazy. So we can now use science, possibly. I'm not saying that's 100% what happened, although it seems likely.
It's certainly a factor.
It seems likely.
Yeah.
But this is what's crazy is like, we literally, this is why I think it's interesting. What happened there, regardless of what it was. So they think rye ergot poisoning may have caused all these people. And that's why when I said earlier, like you asked, was it all in the Western world?
Yeah.
And I was like, it may have only been in this one spot because they were eating the grains that had rye ergot on them.
Yeah.
Because people will look at this time and be like, those people are crazy. How could they ever let that happen? It seems stupid, but that literally happens.
It does.
And it's happened multiple times in history.
Yeah.
And it just
and whether or not it's ascribed to witchcraft or whatever, fill in the blank. Like mass hysteria is a thing.
Yep.
It's a thing because we're humans.
Yep. So it's like really funny because you look at this as almost like it's funny because when we talk about it now, we're like, oh, well, they were like, hey, if you're not a witch, you'll survive this being lit on fire. And then you're like, well, but she'll die if she's not. And obviously she's not. And they're like, yeah, we're willing to take that risk. Yeah. Which seems crazy to us, so we make fun of it. But that's like legitimately what has just happened recently. Is like people were freaking out about certain stuff. And like, so to me, it's like super funny that this is like, we look at this as like history and be like, what a bunch of dummies. Yeah. How could you possibly act like that? Well, it's like, well,
we just did.
When you're afraid, you may say anything just to be like that. One girl was like, her name was Tituba that I said in the beginning.
Yeah, the servant.
They were like, we're going to kill you because we think you're a witch. If you just admit it, we won't kill you. And she was like, okay, I'm a witch. They're like, great. Who's the other witches? Right. And then she was like, oh, they're all witches. And they're like, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. Yeah. Thank you, Tituba. And so all these other girls, they were like, if you're a witch, if you're a witch, just tell us who the other witches are. If you've been, tell us who did it to you. And so they're like, that guy. And it's literally like, well, I know my dad doesn't like that guy. So like, he's a witch and his wife's a witch and that lady's a witch. And they're all like, yeah, that sounds right. She's a witch.
If you understand motivations of people, like what motivates them, it very easily, and like the way you're describing that could be, it's just one voice, but you're familiar with the good cop, bad cop routine.
Sure.
And most of the listeners probably understand that. So where you have the heavy that's coming in and saying, well, you're a witch, and then he leaves, and we're going to do this thing to you unless you change your mind. And then the good cop comes in and says, look, just admit you're a witch. You're going to live if you admit you're a witch.
That's exactly
and
right.
Principally, a principal person is going to say, like, no, I'm not a witch.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you burn me. I don't care if you hang me. I don't care if you drown me.
Yeah.
Any one of those three, because I'm not going to say I'm a witch, because I know what that means. Right. I'm denying certain things that I subscribe to. But if you're not foundational in that, and you are interested in your survival, and you don't really subscribe to those principles, of course, and if you're motivated otherwise, like, hey, if I do this, I might get something out of it.
Yeah.
And it's not this equation that you're running through your mind, but it happens subconsciously. Yeah, and it's very easy to see how it could happen.
It's funny because the reason I like this story, I guess, is because I can tie it to many things, not even just what happened recently, like with like vaccines and all that stuff, but you can literally, like, people will be like, why would they even admit that they were a witch? It's crazy. But if you can like pull up multiple stories about police interrogations, where that like somebody said they did it, they didn't do it,
right?
And they
go to jail,
and they go to jail, but they definitely didn't do it. And people will be like, why did you say yes? And they were like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I was exhausted. And they just were like, it'll be easier for you if you just say yes. And so, like,
because if I say no and I'm convicted, it's going to be so much worse for me.
Correct.
And so that's a tough position to put people in,
and especially back then, because they were literally like, I mean, I don't know what I would do if they were like, listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. Let me level with you, guy. If you're a witch, just say you're a witch.
Yeah.
You can go home. You can hang out with your family. You just show me some other witches. But if you're not a witch, we're gonna burn you.
Yeah.
And because you're going to survive it if you're a witch. But you're like, but I'm not going to survive it. I'm not a witch.
Right.
And they're like, well, we're still going to burn you. I mean, I don't know what I would do. And it's not that they were stupid back then. They just didn't have the technology or the resources we have now. But it still happens today. People are still do that stuff all the time. Even now, like people admitting to crimes they didn't commit or jumping on the bandwagon and being, just so they don't. This is really like what I think is like, you have these young girls who are impressionable. They don't want a lot of attention on them in terms of like, they don't want to be in any more trouble. So they're just going to shift the blame.
Right.
Or they're going to be like, that person's a witch and that person's a witch and that person's a witch.
Especially when they're giving this out that makes it so easy to say, yeah, that person.
You're giving an out to somebody that's like not like a fully formed adult.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to take that all the time, every time.
And we know that until your 20s, your prefrontal cortex is not even completely formed.
I think it's like 25 or something.
So your decision making is not exactly spot on.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know when I was that age, I thought, that's stupid. That's crazy.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
It's 100% true. So
it's 100% true.
You're giving a ton of power to these girls who you were just like, listen, hon, if you just tell us who's a witch, we're not even going to be mad at you. They're like, okay, well, yeah, this person's a witch. I mean, if you watch The Crucible, I think it does a really good job tying it in. I mean, obviously it has like dramatized like storylines.
Sure, it's Hollywood.
And it's Hollywood stuff. But Daniel Day-Lewis is a phenomenal actor. And
he can grow a mustache.
And he can grow one heck of a mustache. This has nothing to do with it, but if you haven't seen There Will Be Blood, you should go see There Will Be Blood. But I just think it's a fascinating, I don't know why I think it's so fascinating. I'd love to go to Salem and check out like the little tour that they have. But it's fascinating how quickly this really got out of hand.
Yeah.
I mean, it just got out of hand. So you have these people that, why do you think it got out of hand? Is it because it was such a more religious environment back then?
I don't think it has to do with that. I think it just has to do with just human nature.
Okay.
That we are all, we all fall prey to groupthink.
Sure.
Without a doubt.
Right.
And and mass hysteria is a thing. Mass formation is an absolute thing. Sure. It happens everywhere. I've seen it happen firsthand where I was on the receiving end of it. Won't go into details, but it is one of those things. It had nothing to do with this, the recent stuff.
Okay.
And how quickly a crowd can turn and get violent really quick.
Yeah.
And it is insane how quickly it happens. And it is frightening how quickly it happens. And so I can see that happening in this instance. It has nothing to do with whether or not these folks were pious or whether they were Puritans or if they were Buddhist monks. It doesn't matter because it happens to anybody because of our own nature, which is it's a fallen state.
I guess my immediate knee-jerk reaction is to think that it has something to do with religion solely because you're talking about like the devil. But it may have had an issue, but I think that you're right. I think it may have had a part of it, like the religious side had a part of it, but I think you're right. Like
It's just a vehicle to it.
It's just like people just had, like it was an immediate groupthink reaction. Like it was just like, I mean, they've had crowds there. People were like, burn her, like, you know what I mean? And it's like a crazy thing to say because they're like, and people to just justify it to be like, well, we're going to burn her. And if she's not a witch, she'll burn. And everybody's like, perfect. That's a great way to do it. But like even here, like sitting last night thinking about this when I was going to talk about it, it's like a hysterical thing to be like, well, dude, if she was a witch, she would just kill you.
Right.
Like she would just do the thing.
If she had supernatural abilities,
she would just not be there anymore. Like what are you worried about? Like what has she done that you're worried about specifically? Are you afraid she's going to kill you? Because if she's a witch, she'll just kill you.
Right.
But they didn't.
If you could survive a burning.
Yeah. I mean,
what are these ropes going to do?
Yeah. So you're going to really upset her by making her super hot. And then she's gonna be like, yeah, you got me. I am a witch. You got me. So it's like a fascinating case to me. It's a fascinating case to me, and I really enjoy like looking at it. And I was gonna watch the movie again before we did the podcast, but now I'm even more excited to watch it because I didn't get a chance to watch it.
Well, I never heard of it, but now that's one of the takeaways for me is maybe I should watch
The Crucible.
The Crucible.
If you like, I'm just being honest. If you like Daniel Day-Lewis, you're gonna like.
I like him in some things. Yeah, he's a really good actor.
Do you like him as Lincoln?
I never watched that movie.
It's very.
I watched The Last of the Mohicans, and I watched the Italian version of There Will Be Blood.
Yep.
The first 30 minutes of it.
Yeah. The Last of the Mohicans is good. He was Matty Bumpo.
Yeah,
I do remember that.
There was something else I saw him in. I can't remember. Doesn't matter.
No, he's
a phenomenal actor.
He's not in Dancing with Wolves.
No,
that's Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner.
Yeah, it's a great movie. We got off topic there.
Yeah.
So Adam, out of all the stuff I said today, what are some things you took away from it?
The big takeaway is this Rye Ergot thing. That's a vehicle. That's a potential explanation of how. The kind of catalyst, because I know human nature. Human nature is, well, if I envy someone else's possessions, which we see that all the time, I'm going to capitalize on that.
Right.
If I see some kind of vehicle, and the vehicle was these girls were doing this thing, and there were accusations made.
Right.
So that's interesting that would happen. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
And just a reminder of the groupthink. Groupthink is a thing. We're going to do a podcast on a series of podcasts on that actually.
Yep.
That I've got planned out, but it is phenomenal how quickly a tide will turn based off of just this hysteria that forms through a number of people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's the underlying theme is groupthink. I think the Rye Ergot side of things is a very interesting twist, and I think it's going to make people go search it and read about it.
Yeah.
Disclaimer, it's not, they cannot prove it to 100%.
Sure.
But they sure think that that's a major reason why, and there's a lot of studies on it. So if you're interested in this, go search it. There's a ton of articles on it. I didn't want to get into it too much. I just kind of want to explain what was going on. But I think it's a fascinating thing, and I think it does tie it into a groupthink kind of mentality.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of an interesting case. But I think it was a fun episode.
It was.
It was fun.
It was very interesting.
So that was awesome. So we appreciate y'all listening.
Absolutely.
Hope you guys go search Rye Ergot. And if you want to, burn some witches, let us know. But until next week, guys, this has been Mishmash Men. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.